The hallway was lined with coats that didn't belong to us. One of them, a long gray wool one with a fur collar, still had a perfume I didn't recognize. Expensive, sharp, and cold. Every time someone opened the door, it lifted off the fabric like smoke. She had vanished 15 minutes earlier. The last time I saw her, she was standing by the table with the hand-blown glass bowls, the ones filled with pomegranate seeds and tiny silver spoons no one was actually using. Her mask had slipped just enough to show the side of her mouth. She was smiling. Not at me. Someone bumped into me and said, "Sorry, bro," but I didn't turn around. I kept watching the table. It was empty now. I walked through the house, past the laughing rooms, the candlelit bathroom with rose petals in the sink, the couple making out by the laundry chute like teenagers hiding from the world. Still no sign of her. I found her in the hallway. Finally. She was standing by the staircase, one heel on, the other dangling from her fingers. Her hair was a little messy, her lipstick half-worn. Her phone screen lit her face in cold blue. She wasn't smiling now. When she saw me, she looked like she expected someone else. Then came the line. Without looking up from her screen, she said, "Step aside or walk away." It wasn't even dramatic. Just tired. Like she'd rehearsed it. Then she turned, barefoot, and walked upstairs into someone else's house, someone else's party, like she lived there. I didn't follow. Not right away. Instead, I just stood there like an idiot under a hallway light that kept flickering. People brushed past me like I wasn't real. Music thudded somewhere far away, like it was underwater. When I finally went upstairs, she wasn't in any of the rooms. Not in the master bedroom. Not in the weird art room with the glass pyramid in the corner. Not in the hallway with the mirror that made everyone look like they were melting. And then I found the door. It was barely cracked open. Inside, a single blue light pulsed from a phone charger. The bed was unmade. Someone had knocked over a lamp. There was a heel in the corner that didn't match the one she'd been holding. The window was open, and she was gone. I don't remember how I got home. Maybe I took an Uber. Maybe I walked the 4 miles through sleet and half-melted snow. All I know is that by the time I opened the front door, the lights were off, the clock read 3:13 a.m., and my throat burned from breathing too hard for too long. Her coat wasn't on the hook. Her boots weren't by the door. Her toothbrush was gone. Not everything, just hers. As if she hadn't packed to leave, just plucked herself out of the space like she'd never belonged there to begin with. It felt surgical, empty. I didn't even take my shoes off. I just stood in the kitchen, staring at the mug she left on the counter before the party. Lipstick stain faint. Her usual shade, Crimson Echo, or some name that sounded like a sad indie band. I remember touching the handle. It was cold. I didn't sleep that night. Or the next. The third night, I got a message. No name. No number. Just a photo sent from an anonymous burner account on a messaging app one hadn't used since college. It was a picture of that room, the one with the flickering blue light from the party. Same bed, same window, same chaos. But in this version, there were 2 people in it. Her, and a man I'd never seen before. They were standing near the window, faces turned just slightly away. Her hand rested on his chest like it belonged there, like it had been there before. His other hand was cupped around her jaw, gently, like he was about to kiss her. Her eyes were closed. I stared at that photo for an hour, zoomed in, analyzed the grain, tried to tell myself it was fake. It wasn't. She wore the same dress, the same bracelet I bought her for our 4th anniversary, the one with the bee charm, because she used to say bees were her spirit animal. The caption under the image was one word. Again. Again. That word echoed louder than the photo itself. Again meant this wasn't the first time. Again meant it had happened before. Again meant I missed it. My hands were shaking so bad I dropped my phone. And here's the worst part. I didn't feel rage. Or betrayal. Not at first. What I felt was embarrassed. Deeply, bone-deep, humiliated. Like I'd been the only person who didn't realize I'd become the side character in my own marriage. The next morning, I messaged her. No reply. I called. Straight to voicemail. By noon, I was checking her email. She left it logged in on the iPad once. I remembered the password. Bees for life with a little exclamation at the end. There were no new messages. But there were drafts. And one of them was titled, in all lowercase, What I Never Said. It was 5 pages long. I read it. Twice. And after I did, I realized the man in the photo wasn't the worst part of this. The worst part was that she never planned to come back. I read her unfinished email for the third time the next morning, sitting in the same chair she used to drink coffee in, sunlight crawling across the table like it didn't care about my world collapsing. The draft wasn't a confession. It was more like a goodbye letter that forgot how to end. She wrote about being tired of pretending, about how she felt invisible inside something that was supposed to be home. She mentioned a promise she couldn't break this time. That line stuck out like a shard of glass. A promise to who? Her words weren't angry. They were gentle, almost tender, like she was writing to a ghost. Halfway through, she wrote, "He said it would be quick this time. Cleaner. No more hiding." The rest of the paragraph was deleted mid-sentence, just a single S before the cursor blinked. I stared at that letter for hours until I started to imagine the blinking cursor breathing. By the afternoon, I decided to find out who the man in the photo was. Not because I thought it would fix anything, but because my mind had become a spinning wheel of what-ifs that I couldn't shut off. I started with the party host, the gallery owner, a guy named Martin. He had one of those Instagram accounts filled with champagne bottles and abstract art that looked like someone sneezed paint onto a canvas. I scrolled through his posts until I found the photo from that night, the masquerade. There she was again, blurry in the background, standing next to a man wearing a navy suit and holding a drink. The caption read, "Great turnout. Thanks to Aiden for the introduction." Aiden. I found him fast. He wasn't hard to locate. People like him never are. Polished, curated profiles. Corporate smiles. Every photo looked like a stock image for success. His bio said strategic consultant. I didn't know what that meant, but apparently it came with tailored suits and a face that could sell trust to strangers. And there, buried in his tagged photos, was one that stopped my breath. My wife, smiling with him at a coffee shop I'd never been to. The timestamp was 7 months old. I messaged him. I didn't threaten, didn't accuse. I just said, "I think you know my wife. Can we talk?" He read it instantly, but didn't respond. I sent another. Then another. Hours passed. Still nothing. That night, I heard a car stop outside. I looked through the blinds. A dark sedan sat idling by the curb. The engine stayed on, headlights dimmed. No one got out. After a few minutes, it drove away. I told myself I was imagining things. Grief does that. It bends the edges of reality until everything looks like a clue. At 2 a.m., my phone buzzed. A message from an unknown number. Don't message him again. She made her choice. No name. No photo. Just that. My hands went numb. I typed back, "Who is this?" No response. A minute later, the number disappeared, deleted, untraceable. I sat there in the dark, every shadow in the room suddenly feeling alive. That was the night I stopped thinking she'd simply left me. Something else was happening. Something planned. Her last words at the party, "Step aside or walk away," started to sound less like a breakup and more like a warning. The next morning, I woke up on the couch with my phone still in my hand, and the blue light of the screen burned into my vision. The message, "She made her choice," replayed in my head like a whisper that didn't want to fade. I tried to convince myself it was just Aiden or one of his friends trying to scare me, but a part of me, the part that used to trust my wife, was gone. What replaced it was a raw, hungry kind of curiosity. I needed to see that room again. The one from the photo. I had to know if it was real or some staged illusion meant to break me. I started with the gallery's public listing. Martin's name came up with 2 addresses, one for the main location in the historic district, and another one downtown, a newer place that wasn't open to the public yet. Under renovation, the listing said. That second address matched the background architecture I'd noticed in the photo. The same arched window with chipped paint and the faint pattern of a mural half-scrubbed from the brick. My chest tightened. I didn't even think. I just grabbed my coat and drove there. It was raining by the time I arrived. The street was almost deserted, the kind of place where puddles reflect streetlights that never seem to change color. The building stood at the end of the block, old stone facade, heavy doors locked with a chain. I walked around the side and found a narrow metal staircase leading down to a basement entrance covered in graffiti and flyers for events that had already passed. One of them said Private Exhibition, The Human Echo. The date matched the night of the masquerade. My hands started to shake again. This wasn't just some party. It was their party. The door downstairs wasn't locked. It opened with a long, reluctant creak. The smell hit first, damp concrete, paint thinner, and something faintly metallic. The air felt wrong, like a place that had seen too many secrets. My phone flashlight cut through the dark, revealing canvases stacked against the walls. All of them showed blurred faces. Women mostly. Some with gold dresses, some with masks. And in the center of the largest one, under a cracked glass frame, was her. My wife. Her portrait was unfinished. Her eyes were painted in perfect detail, but the rest of her face faded into smudges and dripping streaks of red. Beneath it, in messy handwriting, someone had written, "Absent by choice." I stepped closer. That's when I noticed the sound. A soft hum, like electricity under the floor. I followed it to a corner where a small generator buzzed beside an old desk. Papers were scattered across it. Invoices, guest lists, coded notes. I flipped through them, and one name kept reappearing in the margin, underlined over and over. Aiden C. Harrow. There was also a receipt stapled to one page. It was for temporary security services and dated the night of the party. The note scribbled underneath made my stomach drop. All entries verified. Target will comply. Before I could process what that meant, I heard footsteps behind me. Slow, careful, each one echoing against the concrete like a countdown. I turned off my flashlight instinctively and held my breath. The footsteps stopped right outside the door. Then a voice, male, calm, distant, said, "You shouldn't have come here." I froze. My heart slammed so hard I thought it might give me away. The door didn't open, but the shadow under it shifted. He was waiting, listening. Then, after a few long seconds, the sound of retreating steps. Silence again. I didn't move for a full minute. When I finally did, I ran, up the stairs, through the rain, into the car. I drove until the city lights vanished in the rearview mirror. My hands were shaking so badly that I could barely hold the steering wheel. Whoever that was, they knew I'd been there. They knew I'd seen the paintings. And somehow, I was sure of one more thing. That voice belonged to Aiden. But what chilled me most wasn't that he'd found me. It was the certainty that he hadn't come alone. I didn't go home that night. I couldn't. The rain was still falling when I parked at a 24-hour diner outside the city, one of those places where the coffee tastes like burnt rubber and the lights hum louder than the customers. I sat in a booth by the window with my wet coat dripping onto the floor, replaying the sound of that voice in my head. "You shouldn't have come here." The words had weight to them, not just a warning, but ownership. Like he wasn't surprised to find me there, just annoyed that I'd interrupted something in progress. The waitress poured me coffee and asked if I was okay. I must have looked half dead because she didn't wait for an answer before leaving me alone. My phone vibrated against the table. A new message. Unknown number again. Just 3 words. "You left something." Attached was a short audio file. I hesitated, glanced around the empty diner, then pressed play. For a moment, there was only static, soft, shifting, like an old radio trying to find a signal. Then, faintly, a voice. Her voice. My wife's. Whispering something I couldn't quite make out. I turned the volume up. She was saying my name. Not screaming, not pleading. Just repeating it slowly, almost tenderly, over and over, until another voice interrupted. Male, confident, familiar. "Not yet," it said. Then the file cut off. I sat frozen, the coffee cooling beside my hand. My first thought was that it had to be fake, some kind of cruel trick. But the breath in her voice, the small catch she always had on the letter M when she said my name, that was real. That was her. I saved the file and played it again, then again, each time straining to catch the background noise. There was something mechanical under the voices, a slow, repetitive click that reminded me of the gallery's generator. By morning, the storm had passed, and the sky outside was the color of old paper. I drove home in silence, gripping the steering wheel so hard my fingers hurt. When I walked inside, the house felt wrong. Not empty, exactly, but rearranged somehow. There was a smell I couldn't place, not perfume this time, but ozone and dust, like the scent after lightning strikes. The living room curtains were open even though I always kept them closed. A single envelope sat on the kitchen counter. No address, no stamp, just my name in her handwriting. Inside were 3 USB drives and a note that said, "If you want the truth, don't call anyone. Don't trust the police. Don't go back to the gallery." That was it. Nothing else. My chest tightened. I plugged the first drive into my laptop. It contained audio files, dozens of them, labeled with dates going back almost a year. The first few were just silence, punctuated by static and faint movements. But the later ones, they had voices. Conversations between her and someone else. Aiden, I realized after a few minutes. He was talking about sessions, about roles, about building a narrative. And she responded in soft, uncertain tones, saying things like, "He'll never understand, and it has to look real." Every new file twisted the air tighter around me. They weren't love notes or secret recordings of arguments. They sounded rehearsed, like parts of a script, a performance. I started scrolling through them faster, listening for clues, for context, for anything that made sense. Then I hit one labeled Final Sequence. MP3. I pressed play. Aiden's voice first, calm and direct. "When I tell you to say the line, you say it exactly." Her voice followed, small and trembling. "And then I walk away?" "Yes," he said. "Then you walk away. He needs to see it. That's what makes it real." The air left my lungs. That line, "Step aside or walk away," it was scripted, rehearsed. The entire scene at the party wasn't spontaneous. It was planned. But planned for what? My screen flickered, the file glitching at the end. Through the static, I heard something faint. A man in the background saying, "He'll find the tapes eventually." Then silence. I sat there for a long time, my reflection trembling in the dark laptop screen. The woman I thought I knew, the one who laughed over burnt pancakes and left notes in my coat pockets, had been performing a part. And somehow, I was the audience. When I finally looked up, the window across the room caught my eye. Someone was standing on the other side of the glass, motionless, watching. And this time, I didn't imagine it. I didn't move for what felt like a full minute. Just sat frozen in my chair, blinking at the window, heart banging inside my ribs like it wanted out. The figure outside didn't flinch. No knock. No gesture. Just standing there in the faint porch light. Not close enough to see a face, but close enough to know it was a man. Tall. Still. He didn't belong to the street. He wasn't just passing by. He was watching me. I stood slowly, reached for my phone. But by the time I raised it to take a photo, the window was empty. I ran to the front door and swung it open, but the porch was bare. Street silent. No footsteps. No car pulling away. Just wind and the faint rustle of leaves against the gutters. I scanned the sidewalk, checked the neighbor's yard. Nothing. He was gone. I slept with the lights on that night. Every creak of the floorboards made my nerves twitch. I dreamed of the gallery again. Except this time, the paintings had no faces at all. Just blank skin where mouths and eyes should be. And in the center of the room, my wife stood with her back to me, whispering words I couldn't hear, lips moving too fast. By morning, I was unraveling. The line between real and manipulated was fraying at the edges. I started going through the USB recordings again, this time slowing them down, reversing clips, enhancing background noise. I'd never done this kind of thing before, but I was desperate. It wasn't about catching her anymore. It wasn't even about Aiden. It was about figuring out what the hell they had dragged me into. Then I found something. In the background of several audio files, there was a repeated pattern of 3 soft beeps. Always the same rhythm. It wasn't part of their conversation, just buried under the surface, like a timestamp or signal. I isolated one of the files and ran it through an audio spectrogram app. The waveform looked ordinary until the end. There, tucked into the final few seconds, was a high-frequency pulse followed by silence. Too clean. Too intentional. I uploaded the sound into a forensic tool I found on a message board, the kind used by podcasters to remove ambient noise. What emerged beneath the hiss of silence made my blood run cold. A voice, different from the others, deeper, unfamiliar. It simply said, "Subject compliant. Emotional baseline breached. Continue sequence." My stomach turned. This wasn't an affair. This wasn't a love triangle or some dramatic betrayal. It was a sequence, a process, a test. My wife wasn't just leaving me. She had led me somewhere. Into something. And whatever it was, I was clearly part of it. I needed more. I had to find her. Not because I wanted her back. I didn't even know who her was anymore. But because if I didn't get answers, I was going to lose my grip on reality completely. I started retracing everything she'd done in the last few months. The places she'd gone, the names she'd mentioned in passing, the stories she told that I'd brushed off as nothing. There was one name that stuck. She had mentioned a professor once, someone she said had changed the way she saw the world. I thought it was just one of her book club stories, but now it felt like a clue. I dug through her old journals, flipping past pages of quotes and clipped poems until I found a name, Dr. Corin Vale. Next to it, Cognition Lab 12th and Holloway. Do not tell Mort. I stared at that page for a long time. That address wasn't in the city. It was further out, an old industrial block that had been half abandoned for years. I knew because I'd passed it during my morning commutes. There were no labs there, just warehouses. And now, apparently, a secret worth hiding from me. I printed the page, packed a bag, and as I zipped it shut, I noticed something under the bed I hadn't seen before. A small wire device, no larger than a coin, tucked between the floorboards. I picked it up carefully. There was a tiny blinking light. A microphone. They'd been recording me, too. I drove for an hour without music, without thinking, just watching the road blur past the windshield in streaks of gray and cracked white paint. My mind kept circling the same realization. The microphone under the bed wasn't new. It had dust on it. It had been there for a while. That meant someone had been listening to me before the masquerade, before the gallery, maybe even before I suspected anything at all. Every argument, every quiet moment, every desperate phone call, recorded, stored, analyzed. When I reached the edge of the industrial district, the buildings started to feel like ruins. Concrete husks, rusted metal signs, windows that stared back at you like they'd seen things you couldn't imagine. I pulled over on a dead-end street where GPS said Holloway should be, but it wasn't there. Just a row of warehouses with boarded-up doors and graffiti-stained brick. No lab, no sign, just dead air. I walked the block anyway. On foot, everything felt more wrong. The air smelled like burnt insulation and wet paper. Crows sat on a wire above me, too still, too quiet. I kept checking the number on the building she'd written in her journal. 319 Holloway. But there was number 319. It skipped from 317 to 321, like someone had torn the middle out and sewn the ends together. Then I noticed something strange. The wall between 317 and 321 looked newer than the rest. Like it had been built quickly, covered in fake soot to match the others. I stepped closer and tapped it. It rang hollow. A thin wall. Temporary. Behind a rusted trash bin was a steel door half hidden by a sheet of warped plywood. It had no markings, no handle, just a thin black strip that blinked once as I approached. Before I could even process it, the door slid open with a hiss of hydraulics. I hesitated. Every part of me screamed that this was a bad idea, but I was too far in, too far gone. I stepped inside. The room was cold, silent. Concrete floors, exposed piping, sterile lighting. It didn't look like a lab. It looked like the kind of place people get forgotten. In the center stood a reception desk, empty, and behind it, a long hallway with security cameras mounted every 20 feet. The moment I stepped forward, a voice crackled from a hidden speaker. Morton Lang, please proceed to interview chamber 3. I froze. No one called me that. Not since high school. Even my wife called me Mort. Who are you? I shouted. No reply. Just a soft click as the lights down the hallway flickered on, one by one, leading me forward like breadcrumbs. I followed them. Room 3 had no door, just a black curtain that slid open as I approached. Inside, a woman waited. Mid-50s, pale gray suit, posture like a sculpture. She didn't smile, didn't blink. Dr. Vale, she said, without offering a hand. You've been looking for me. I couldn't speak. I just stared. We didn't expect you to find us this quickly, she continued, motioning for me to sit. But I suppose desperation accelerates the mind. That's good. You'll need it to stay sharp from this point on. What is this? I asked, finally finding my voice. What are you doing? What is this place? She placed a small folder on the table. My name was on the tab. Inside were transcripts of the audio recordings from the USB drives, cleaned, dated, analyzed. On the last page was a form labeled Sequence Observation Record, Mort Lang. Status, activated. I felt the room tilt. You were never the subject, she said calmly. You were the lens. The filter. We needed someone unaware, emotionally bonded, reactive but controllable. You were perfect. She chose well. My hands shook. So this was an experiment? She nodded. Not on you. Through you. I stood up. Where is she? Dr. Vale looked up at the ceiling like she could see beyond it. She's alive. She's safe. And she's free of it now. Free of what? I demanded. She paused. Then, For the first time, she smiled, but it wasn't warm. It was the kind of smile that makes you feel like you missed something vital. "The role," she said. "You were never her husband, Mort. You were her tether." Then she stood, opened a door I hadn't noticed behind her, and disappeared into the dark without another word. I didn't follow. I just stood there, staring at the folder, trying to remember what my marriage even felt like before this all began, and wondering if any of it had ever been real. I stayed in that room for hours, maybe longer. There were no clocks, no noise. No one came back. At some point, I stopped waiting and started breathing again. It didn't all hit me at once. The weight of what she'd done, what they had used me for, it seeped in slowly, like ink spreading through fabric. But it didn't crush me. That was the strange part. I didn't feel broken. I felt emptied, and in a way, clean. I took the folder with me. No one stopped me. I walked out the same way I came in, down the hall, past the blinking strip of black glass, out into the rain-washed world that hadn't changed, even though I had. When I got home, I didn't destroy the evidence. I didn't throw the drives in the fire or wipe the files from my computer. I kept them, not because I wanted revenge, not even because I wanted justice. I kept them as proof, not of what she did, but of what I survived. The truth is, the last few years of my marriage weren't a lie. They were just someone else's story, told through my eyes. And now, finally, I was free to write my own. I started over quietly. I left the city, moved to a small town with trees that arch over the streets like cathedral ceilings and neighbors who wave without needing a reason. I took a job drawing educational diagrams for science textbooks. Not glamorous, but honest. Clean work. Work that doesn't talk back or hide meaning between lines. The first few months, I didn't speak to anyone beyond grocery store cashiers and the mailman. I didn't trust anyone. But slowly, the numbness softened. I planted a small herb garden. I adopted a mutt with one eye and a crooked tail. I started cooking meals for myself again, not because I had to, but because I wanted to. I even painted one wall of my new apartment deep blue, just because I could. Then, one morning, about 8 months after I left everything behind, I got a letter in the mail. No return address. No name. Just a single sheet of paper. All it said was, "I never stopped winding the watch, even when you weren't looking." And underneath that, taped gently to the page, was a photo. Me, sitting in the diner, on the night everything fell apart. Someone had taken it from outside the window. I was hunched over my coffee, pale, broken. But the focus wasn't on me. It was on the watch in my hand. Still ticking. Still alive. I folded the letter and placed it in a drawer, next to a new notebook I'd started. One that wasn't about her or what happened, but about everything I'd learned since. How to trust myself again. How to find meaning without someone else giving it to me. How to let go of stories that don't belong to you, no matter how convincing they sound in someone else's voice. I haven't heard from her again, and I don't need to, because somewhere in that performance, in that maze of shadows and recordings and roles I never agreed to play, something real survived. Me. And that was enough.